Well, hello and welcome to the Working Lunch, the Slow Chambers weekly series where we connect you with our community leaders and get to know the person behind the position. I'm Jim D'Antona, CEO of the San Luis Chamber. We're excited you're back here with us today for today's interesting conversation where we get to turn the tables a bit on Slow's famous interviewer and make him the guest, hometown radio host Dave Congalton. Dave got his start on the Central Coast in 1987 as a writer for the Telegram Tribune. He also spent 12 years leading the Central Coast Writers Conference at Cuesta College, helping new and established writers hone their craft. In 1992, an opportunity would present itself, and through some fortuitous events and unbeknownst to both of us, our worlds would start an initial connection. Turns out that a popular Slow daily radio talk show host had just turned in her notice to go live and go live down in Southern California with her future life partner. That talk show host was Betsy Nash, and Dave would take over the show and lead it to the popular show that it is today, which will celebrate 30 years in January 2022. Betsy would end up marrying the love of her life, making her, further down the road, my mother-in-law. So even though we only met after I moved to town in 2018, it turns out that Dave and I go way back. I'm so looking forward to talking with Dave about what led him to a life in local radio, the mission of his show, and how local media has changed in his over 30 years here on the Central Coast. Dave, thanks so much for being here.
Jim, good afternoon. Thank you for the kind introduction.
Yeah, well, as folks sit down to lunch, where are you zooming in from today?
I'm zooming in from my new home in San Luis Obispo. I've been away for the last 24 years. Some people might remember living on Pacific Street in 1997 and the house fire that we had and the loss of 5 animals. It was big news at the time, a horrific tragedy. And I have been living up in North County and down in South County, and I decided it was time to come home. So I'm back in San Luis Obispo, and I intend to stay here the rest of my life.
Well, I'm glad to hear that. We're certainly glad to have you back here locally. I always like to start, by learning a little bit more about how people's career path started. Maybe you could talk to us a little bit growing up. Were you writing for the high school newspaper, or was your family in showbiz? What got you in the work?
Well, how much time do you have? The short answer was that in high school, I was both a writer and I had a radio show. What I didn't have was confidence. So when I went off to college, I just forgot about radio and I forgot about writing, and I focused on competitive speech events. And that led to me becoming a college professor and a speech coach. And I did that for 10 years. And I ended up with a job in Tulsa, Oklahoma. And I was living a life that I did not want to live. And what I really wanted to do was A, live in California, and B, do something creative. And so I went into therapy, and the guy said, "What do you want to do?" And I explained it to him, and he said, "Okay, I'm going to solve your problem. You're going to finish your year here at the University of Tulsa. You're going to quit your job. You're going to move to California, and you're going to find something creative to do." And then I was looking on the job board. They had job boards back in those days, and there was a job, a 1-year non-renewable lectureship at Cal Poly San Luis Obispo. I had never heard of Cal Poly. I had never heard of San Luis Obispo, but it was a job in California. So I came here in 1987. In March of 1988, I won the local stand-up comedy contest as the funniest person in San Luis Obispo County. And that was it. That was the spark. That was the affirmation that what I felt inside, that I was longing to do something else. That was it. You were meant to do something else. So it was a question of coming out here and figuring out exactly what that was.
That's incredible. That's actually a really incredible story. But what was there? Had you been to California before when you were trying to get here, or was that just?
I'd come out. I'd spent some time in LA, and my brother has been down in Laverne since 1981. But I was always drawn to California, and I knew that I was meant to do something else. So since 1987. As you mentioned, I've had the radio show. I wrote for the Telegram Tribune. I ran the Writers Conference. I've done really bad stand-up comedy. I wrote the movie Authors Anonymous. My dream has come true. So ups and downs, but I'm very pleased that I was able to make that move from the Midwest and come out and do what I really wanted to do.
It's a really great story. And so you said before, like you were a writer for the Telegram Tribune. How does one go from Telegram Tribune to getting discovered to be the talk show radio host in a community you kind of just recently moved to?
Well, that's the beauty of California. If you go to the East Coast, it's all about who are your ancestors and did you come over on the Mayflower? The beauty of it is I was nobody. I didn't know anybody in this town. And within 5 years, I was accomplishing all the things that you just underscored, because in California, it doesn't matter. Everybody gets an equal chance here. I had been a reporter at the Telegram Tribune full-time, went down to part-time. So I needed another job. And I was married to Charlotte Alexander at the time, and she was the marketing director at Ceslock. And Frank Sheehan, who owned the station at the time, was looking for someone in the afternoons at KVEC to go along with Betsy Nash, the queen of morning radio. And he called Charlotte one day just to talk about something and said, yeah, I'm trying to find somebody. And Charlotte, oh, David could do that. So I went in for an interview. Dave Cox and Maggie Cox were running the station at the time for Frank. And I guess I was the only guy they could find who was willing to work for $12,000 a year, but it was a part-time job. And so it was going to be Betsy in the morning and Dave in the afternoon. So I walk in very first day. Dave Cox calls me in. He goes, Betsy's just quit. She's moving to Los Angeles. You're taking over for Betsy. So I had done radio in, I don't know, 20, 25 years. So not only am I going to do something I really don't know that much about, I'm taking over for the #1 radio personality on the Central Coast.
And that feels so Central Coast that you could jump right in. Yeah. It's an incredible. And really, we think about how many pivotal moments in history have been via radio and now podcasts as well. Maybe you could talk a little bit about, from your perspective, what sets talking, listening, maybe apart from reading newspapers or watching TV?
That's an interesting question. I can tell you from the perspective of someone who's being covered by the media, there's nothing like a live radio interview, because you're not being edited. Your words aren't being taken out of context. You're being given a reasonable amount of time to speak. So I always tell people, if you want your message out, go on a radio station and be interviewed, because it will be your words, not taken out of context. That to me is the biggest.
Well, and having your foot in both sides of having done this, you're an expert on that piece. And maybe you could talk about seeing both sides of this, a little bit about how the changes have occurred maybe in local media and how it operates today.
Well, here's my message to everybody tuning into this. Please support local media. Support the Tribune, support New Times, support KCBX, support KVEC. Wherever you get your information from, it has changed so radically. I talked to Joe Tarica a couple months ago. I don't know if the numbers are still current, but at the time he was down to 7.5 reporters. 7.5 reporters, that's all he has. At KSBY, it used to be you'd send out a producer, a camera person, and a reporter. Now you've got a reporter doing everything. We just don't have the resources that we used to. Back in the 80s, KVEC had a full news department. We'd cover the city council meetings. Jerry Bunin at the old Telegram Tribune was a one-man army. He'd do Grover Beach, Pismo Beach, or Arroyo Grande city councils. That doesn't get covered now. Times Press Recorder, gone. Sun Bulletin out in Morro Bay, gone. So local media still matters, but we need support.
Well, in your opinion, those changes, have they affected like people's connection to their community, whether that's government, nonprofits, social connection?
How can you hold county government or city government accountable if you don't know what's going on? And it used to be like with the Tribune and the Telegram Tribune, the County Board of Supervisors would meet on a Tuesday, KCBX would carry it live, and the Tribune would have full analysis and reaction the very next day. I don't see that now. I understand. I don't see that now unless it's something really major. So if the media isn't out there to cover, how do we know what's going on? What are we doing? We're relying on Facebook posts from people. Well, did you know? And I'd like my information to be a little bit more accurate than that.
Yeah, well, and I think one piece I'd like to dig in a little later is that idea of the citizen journalist. That's essentially how we're getting some of our information today. But thinking about when you first joined the show and you were taking over, what was your mission with it besides survival? And thinking about what's changed in the years since.
My mission has always been to keep the conversation as local as possible and to open it up to what I call the marketplace of ideas. I started on a Tuesday. That Thursday, I had 3 people come in who were pro-life on the issue of abortion, a position I vehemently disagree with. But this show has never been about me. I'm holding up a mirror to the community. This is who we are in 1995. This is who we are in 2021. And this is what we're talking about. And it's conservatives and liberals and Christians and atheists. Just about anybody can have their voice heard on my show. It is a platform for conversation. That part, I don't think has changed.
Yeah, well, it has. Well, and maybe this is a piece of that. Has the tenor of your callers changed over the past year, 4 years, 30 years, or has just the topic been changed?
Well, what has changed is the demeanor. That it used to be that I could bring in a liberal and a conservative and have a friendly debate, and then we'd all go out to lunch or dinner. And now you can't do that anymore because, like the rest of the country, it's all polarized. And so I can still have the conversation, but I have to bring in people separately because otherwise it just doesn't work.
Well, I was looking at your show schedule, and actually, I think later today you're having former Senator Sam Blakesley, more conservative folk, right leaning, and local attorney Greg Gillette, who's maybe less leaning about homelessness in the community, which I think is a great example of talking about something important, right? Holding the mirror up and having maybe a legit conversation. Is that maybe some hope, or is that a one-off, you think?
Well, my dear friend Sam Blakesley might take exception to the idea that he's far right. I think that since he's left office, Sam has gone back to left of center. But both he and Greg Gillette are joined by the idea of passion for the homelessness and the frustration that they feel that not enough is being done. So they have come together with a plan to address homelessness specifically in the city of San Luis Obispo.
Well, and there we got a question coming in on Facebook, which was, back on the question we were talking about before about local government. Now, this person's name is Betsy Nash. Yes. Do people not care about local news anymore? Is that why maybe the media doesn't have the money they used to?
Well, I would say a couple things. One, I think the advertising dollar has gone elsewhere. The advertising dollar has gone more to social media now. There are certain local companies that I won't name, but their funding is strictly on social media. They want to post on Facebook. They don't want to do TV spots. They don't want to do radio spots. So if you don't have that revenue coming in, where do you cut? Well, you cut back on your news coverage. You cut back on your news staffs. Look at what's happening with newspapers. Are there that many people who read a traditional newspaper anymore? I can't remember the last time I picked up a newspaper. I read it strictly online. So the Tribune, I remember the Tribune opened up that brand new building in 1993. So they left that building and they went to a smaller office, and now the reporters are working from home. I don't know if they're ever coming back to an office or not. So to the traditional media, to answer Betsy's question more directly, newspapers, TV, radio, we're fighting for relevance among the social media crowd.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's such a tough part of it. And maybe we can kind of jump into that a little bit, into the technology and, the idea of the citizen journalist, as you were kind of mentioning earlier, the idea that the audience kind of now informs one another. On the whole, do you think that's a positive evolution?
It can be. And the perfect example of that is Chris Lambert and his Kristen Smart podcasts, which I think has made all the difference in these cases being solved. Stop and think about it for a second. Chris Lambert is a musician. He was a musician with a curiosity. And that 10-part podcast, I honestly think deserves a Pulitzer Prize. I really do. But not everyone is a Chris Lambert. And again, I'll refrain from mentioning specific names, but there are some people who they throw a Facebook page together or a blog together, and they think they're a journalist, and their stuff really doesn't pass muster. And so the problem with the citizen journalist, Jim, in my mind, is that there's a lack of consistency.
Yeah, right. And knowing who's doing the research, who's getting the information, right?
And who holds them accountable? Who's the editor? I mean, for example, with Chris Lambert, a great man and someone I deeply admire, he doesn't have an editor. So who's there to hold him accountable and make sure his stuff is good?
It's a great point. I mean, I think the conversation really goes to the availability and distribution of technology that allows average people to share their thoughts on every topic. Here we are on Facebook Live having this conversation. You're a radio host, and obviously many of these technologies might be considered a threat to your industry. How do you view kind of these technologies?
Well, what you have to do is that you've got to embrace the technologies to the extent that you can. So, for example, on our station, KVEC, we offer podcasts. We podcast all the shows. We've experimented with Facebook Live, and we might do more of that. It's just extra work, and as it is, I have enough of a challenge putting together a 20-hour show every week. So it's a question of priorities. But yeah, the Tribune is another example. They've done a lot of video. They used to just take pictures, but now they shoot video. They do Facebook stuff. So the smart traditional media will survive if we learn to embrace the new technology and not see it as a threat, but as a tool.
Well, and interesting enough, I would think, obviously, I think your bulk of yours listeners come from the Central Coast, but do all your listeners come from the Central Coast if you have the ability to get these podcasts out?
No, I have regular callers from Arizona, San Francisco, LA, but usually it's people who have had some kind of connection to the Central Coast. Either they have lived here at one time, or they have relatives here. They've been to visit. One or two have actually discovered the show somehow. I've got Paul up in San Francisco. I still don't know what his connection is, but we're glad to have him.
Well, it is a great tool because, again, these conversations you're having, whether they're specific to the Central Coast or nationwide or others, obviously getting other perspectives in is a great tool. So I think that's a great piece to be able to know that your message could be shared, and for people who have left the region, right?
Well, the other part of that is our listenership has increased because of podcasts. There are people who can't listen from 3 to 7 every day, or don't want to listen from 3 to 7 every day. So they can go to the podcast at their convenience. They're commercial free, and you can listen to them 24/7. And our podcasts go back at least a year. I think we keep them for a year at a time.
Well, and thinking about that, your radio show in general, I'd love to know, is there a particular show, topic, or caller that stood out as really exceptional, or maybe highlighted the value of the local media?
Here's the moment. It was April, I think 2004, 2005. It's the day Alex Madonna died. And I find out Thursday morning, I cancel the whole show. And the first guest was going to be these folks from Garden Club in Morro Bay. They had an event coming up. And I have to call this woman and I have to explain to her, I am so sorry, but I have to cancel the show with you today because Alex Madonna died. And we need to talk about him. And she said, well, that's not going to take the whole 4 hours, is it? And I said, I think it is. So I started at 3:05 and I spent about 15, 20 minutes just talking about Alex and what he meant to me and my relationship with him. And then we just started taking phone calls. And it was person after person. And at 4:20, it's Phyllis Madonna. She and her family are listening to the show. And I did the smartest thing I have done in 30 years of radio. I shut my mouth, I backed away, and I just let her talk. And she just wanted to thank everyone and to talk about Alex and to have the chance to grieve. And at 4:30, we had to stop for the news and I had to go back to take other calls. But that is the moment that stays with me because it was powerful, it was local, it was true.
That's an incredible story. And I can just imagine listening to that. I mean, unfortunately, I wasn't up here. I mean, one of the things that stuck with me is during the fire, you were on the air in Pismo Beach. We have the big fire. No one can get anywhere, but you are essentially MapQuest driving, getting people around and moving.
I'll say it, and with all due respect to colleagues in other media, you podcast isn't going to help you in information like that. That's where we shine in some kind of local emergency situation. Back in August of 1994 with the Highway 41 fire, we were the only game in town because our transmitter's up by Cal Poly, and everybody who had a transmitter up on the TV Tower Road there, they were off the air. Tribune couldn't publish. We had everybody listening to us.
Yeah, and helping them get around and everybody calling in and checking. It's really amazing. Yeah. Well, do you have any advice for students hoping for a career in journalism or radio in particular?
Oh dear. I wouldn't even begin to answer that, Jim. I don't know what the future of radio is. I'm not sure I'd recommend a career in radio because the technology is changing so much. And I remember there was a reporter at New Times named Jeff McMahon about 20 years ago. Jeff has gone on to become a very successful freelance journalist. And he is a one-man operation. And he's got his computer and his TV camera and his audio, and he travels the world and he covers everything. And if somebody wanted to go into journalism, they've got to be able to master that technology. It's not so much a degree in radio as it is, I always argue for a degree in the liberal arts. Some people make fun of me for that, but I can teach you how to run equipment. What I can't teach you is what the purpose of a grand jury is. I can't teach you history. I can't remind you that what is happening today already happened 25 years ago.
It's an incredible point because that ability to bring that into your program, into your discussions, obviously is a key part of what local media is there for to try and do. That's incredible. Well, when you look to the future, whatever that is, what are some of your hopes for your show?
Well, I have no interest in retiring now. I'm 68 years old, There are things that I want to do. I still think my show matters. There are some people I still want to interview, and I still want to maintain my platform in the community, particularly that I'm now back in town. Uh, I've always reminded people that where a journalist or a media personality lives, they take a particular interest. The late, great Jeff Fairbanks, for example, lived in Los Osos when he was the editor of the Tribune. So if anything happened in Los Osos, the Tribune knew about it, right? And so now I have a renewed interest in San Luis because I'm living here now. So I want to know more about the city council. I want to know more about the Chamber of Commerce. I'm always reinventing the show. There's other writing that I want to do. So when it's time, but I don't see that yet.
Yeah, well, and I would think coming out of COVID, the pandemic, what the economy will look like, what our lives will look like, might provide some new directions for stories. Because I know, like we talked about, right, feeding the beast of 20 hours of show a week.
Well, and this would be a good opportunity, if I may, to extend an opportunity to anybody listening and participating in this today. I feed the beast. I've got 20 hours a week. I'm always looking for guests. And I'm not looking for controversial guests. I'm looking for guests who have something to say, whether it's about the success of your business or perspective on what's happening with the lifestyle, what's happening in our city. Always glad to have new voices on the show, and people can reach me at dave@920kvec.com.
That's fabulous. Well, and I do want to make sure, people can stay up to date with upcoming shows on your program. Where can they go to find the information? Is that on the KVC website?
Well, actually, they can sign up for the KVC Daily Update at 920kvec.com, and we will mail you in advance who's going to be on the show and what time they're going to be on the show.
Well, that's fabulous. We'll add that link to everybody listening or watching. We'll add that into our comments here so you can keep up with that, because that's a really great way to know what's coming up and plan your day. Well, if you know where you're going to be in the car or you're going to be at the house, you can turn those things on. That's incredible.
Yeah, thank you.
Well, and so we'd like to, it's amazing. We've already gone through 30 minutes here, and we like to end our program like we do every week. And like to know from you, what are you looking forward to doing this weekend?
This weekend, I am going to go hiking on Johnson Ranch, which now I don't have to drive a half hour to take advantage of that. And I'm going to try to catch up with some friends that I haven't seen in a long time. And I have my office in the back that still needs to be organized. Hardly an exciting weekend. I'm still not ready to go into crowds. I'm not going to movies. I'm not going to concerts. I'm still not ready for that.
Well, I think a great portion of our population also feels that same way. Again, this is a process to come out of this pandemic. So totally get it. But sounds actually, other than organizing the office, that the rest sounds like it'd be some fun. So Dave, I really want to thank you for spending some time with us talking. And I'm sure our listeners enjoyed, especially that Alex Madonna story. That was really incredible.
Thank you. My pleasure.
Well, as always, if you have questions for Dave, feel free to add them into the Facebook comments below, and Dave might just hop on and try to answer them when he gets a moment.
Sure.
We thank every one of you for tuning in. We hope you'll join us next week. We'll be talking to Michael and Peyton Hughes, co-founders of Gymnazo, talking about opening their company, the trials of operating a gym during and through COVID, and what the future holds. We really appreciate y'all tuning in. Have a wonderful weekend. Stay healthy and safe out there.